all the metrics tell you the Duke's the best team in the country, right? I think just Auburn, probably eye test, and certainly the resume and the wins that they have racked up, I think a lot of people feel like they are the team to beat. Where are you in that debate, Jared? Do you think Duke's the best team in the country or Auburn?
This is tough. I'll be honest. I think the Duke stuff, I'm starting to come around to the idea that they might be better than maybe some of the anti-Duke narratives. Like, the anti-Duke narrative is they play in a bad ACC. This is a bad year for the ACC. So how can we grade them against the other teams? Like, let's say, I don't know, Auburn or the other team. By the way, they beat Auburn earlier this year. Granted, that game was at Cameron. But it's hard to really gauge that because the word that I like to use for this time of year is cross-pollination. What the heck do I mean by cross-pollination? We know how Duke is relative to the rest of the ACC. We've watched 2 months of Duke destroying the ACC. We don't really know how Duke stacks up against this current version of the SEC. We know how Duke stacks up at home against an Auburn team back in, I think that game was in like late November or early December. But we don't really know how good Duke is against this version of the SEC that's played over the last month. And I think that is where I struggle with the handicap. Size-wise, experience-wise, I do think they can stack up against those teams. But I don't know how mentally tough they are. I think there's a certain level of mental toughness that the SEC teams need to put forth with the night in, night out grind. When you go from facing Virginia to Stanford to Cal, then Miami, then Florida State, then Wake Forest, like mentally, you don't have to get as up for those games on a nightly basis because you know you're physically better than them. So mentally, you don't have to be on your A game. Auburn has to be playing at peak level every single moment, mentally and physically, and even spiritually, if they want to go through the SEC gauntlet. So I do think talent-wise, Duke probably is as good, if not better, than every other team in the country. But then there's this mental aspect to handicapping 18 to 22-year-old, or in Auburn's case, 23 and 24-year-old college athletes, that I do think the SEC players have a bit of an edge. But if you don't bring that mentality with you 100%, you're going to get beat, especially in the NCAA tournament. I think right now, if I had to handicap it, I'd put it right at 50-50. I think Duke and Auburn are equal, and I think Duke's probably physically a little bit more gifted, but I think mentally, I think Auburn's a little bit tougher, a little bit more experienced. So I think those things balance each other out. So I'll put them right at level right now, 50-50 between Duke and Auburn.
I think the way that I view it, Jared, I think I would be more surprised if Duke loses in the tournament, right? So if these teams, like, which one would I be more surprised doesn't win the title? I think I'd be more surprised with Duke not winning it. So who would I be more confident, like, betting a future on to win it all? Who would I be more confident in picking as my national championship winner? It'd probably be Duke. But I think Auburn's better, right? I think to your points, like, I think if both teams play their A game, I think Auburn's A game is better just because they're more explosive offensively. Now, when they're in a zone defensively, it feels like they have like 6 or 7 guys on the floor, you know, with how good they are on that side of the ball. What I've been saying about Duke for like the last 3 weeks, and I'll just continue to say it because it's true, and it is my biggest concern with Duke. They played 4 games this year, Jared, that have been decided by 6 points or less.
Yeah.
They're 1-3 in those games, right? And all 3 of those games have been decided the same way, whether it was the Kansas game, whether it was the Kentucky game, the Clemson game. There's like 30 seconds to go. Cooper Flagg has the ball, chance to tie or take the lead, and he's turned it over every single time. They haven't even gotten a shot up. Whether he's traveled, he's dribbled it off his foot, whatever it is, he's turned the ball over all 3 times. So, again, he's still a young freshman. He's an unbelievable talent. He's the best overall freshman I've seen since Anthony Davis, in my opinion. I think he's that good. But the fact we've seen him in that spot 3 times, and not only has he come up empty he's truly come up empty 3 times. We haven't even gotten a shot attempt from Cooper Flagg. And you worry about Duke because it's almost like that stuff with Gonzaga and all their teams about like they don't play anybody for 2.5 months. And then you get thrown into a winner-take-all tournament game, and how is Duke going to handle themselves with 2 minutes to go in a tie game? So I think that's a totally fair comment on Duke and how are they going to handle themselves in stressful situations. That's really my big question because obviously Auburn's been tested. We've seen them in a ton of close games. We've seen how they kind of handle themselves in all these situations, but I just do worry about Duke close games down the stretch, how they're going to look. Do you have concerns about that with Duke at all? Yeah.
Yeah, I'll read you a post that it was from 3 days ago when they were, crapping all over Wake Forest. I tweeted, Duke is a tricky handicap in the tourney. Are they significantly better, more talented than the majority of the teams in the country? Yes. Would they look this dominant playing in the SEC? No. Their biggest red flag is they haven't played in enough close games. And I got some interesting responses. One of the more interesting ones was from Cleb TA, who, again, ton of respect, fantastic handicapper. He said, is there any evidence that a lack of close games is the detriment in the tourney? I know average margin of victory has been a strong predictor of tournament success in the past. Fantastic pushback. Really valid pushback. Like, there isn't any statistical backing that not playing close games is a detriment to you in the tournament. If you win by a lot, you're a good team and you're probably going to advance further in the tournament. But there is something to be said about experience. And it's a lot of freshmen and a lot of players that have not yet ascended to that peak. And I think that is the biggest question that I have. And again, that's not really a red flag. Maybe it's more like a beige flag that they just haven't played in a lot of those tight pressure games. But I'm sure they do in practice. Like, I'm sure they're practicing those tight game situations, late game situations. But it's different when you're playing in them against another team than when John Shire has the whistle and says, all right, let's do the drill again. And I think that, again, is we don't really have any data to say that it's a detriment, but it is a fair narrative to talk about because we just don't know how they're going to react in these situations. And the very few points that we have, they've lost 3 out of 4 of those games.
Yeah, and it's going to be, kind of to your point, like UConn the last 2 years, right? I mean, they've beaten everybody by double digits. So we don't know what they look like in a close game because they just blow everybody out and it doesn't matter. Duke certainly has the capability to do that, but we'll see if that happens. I do want to mention with Auburn, too, Denver Jones did not play against Texas A&M on Tuesday. He got injured in the Kentucky game. He's not one of the superstars. He doesn't have the flash of like a Pettiford or a Broom or a Baker Mazzara, but he's a key piece to that team. And I don't think it's a coincidence, Jared, that they lost to A&M and struggled and he wasn't out there. So just monitor that. I expect him to be good for the NCAA tournament, but if Denver Jones isn't healthy, that could be a big deal for Auburn.